What is up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, welcome to my channel and welcome back to another True Crime Sunday. Today we're going to be covering a case that was sent to me through email. I was sent an email from the victim's daughter's friend who saw my channel through someone recommending me through Reddit. So whoever that was, thanks. Now this case has very little coverage, which is quite insane. It's quite clear that the police and the media and anyone else haven't really picked up this case at all. My video is going to be quite a lot different to anyone else who has covered this case, because I feel like all of the true crime YouTubers who have covered this case have based their video on one particular write-up, which is a really good write-up. I'll leave it in the description box below, but it seems like they're kind of just regurgitating the same information from this write-up, and I did base a lot of my base knowledge from this write-up. The structure of this video is going to be a little bit different. We're actually going to be starting off by talking about someone else before I introduce you to the victim, and then I'm going to be telling you the history, or at least the backstory, of other people at play, and then we're going to get into the theories. I do this because I want to show you how I've linked these other things to this victim's case. So we're going to start off by talking about a guy called Gary Dodson. Gary Dodson is actually, or was actually, a convicted rapist, and he was convicted in 1977. Now, Gary didn't actually do this crime. The woman who accused him of raping her recanted her story. She did this in 1985, so quite some time after he was actually convicted of the crime, but no one really took her recanting of this story seriously. So because no one took her taking back her statement seriously, it took DNA testing to get Gary Dodson off of these rape charges and out of prison. So it was 4 years after this woman was like, actually, this never happened. So Gary was 32 years old at this point. He'd already spent 12 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit, but he was eventually exonerated. So because of this, Gary became quite famous. He was the first man ever to be exonerated by DNA testing. So this caused quite a stir in the US. It was something that was really well televised. It was a huge thing because DNA testing back then was kind of new technology, and it was the first time that anyone had ever been proven to have been failed by the justice system by using this method. When Gary was excused of all charges, he walked out of the courthouse and there was a woman there waiting for him, and she was holding a white carnation. Now the woman's name was Camille Danes, and she was a 21-year-old who had grown up in Chicago, and she grew up in an upper middle class setting. She did ballet for 9 years, she was a straight A student, and she was also a semi-pro ice skater. So when Camille saw the Gary Dodson case televised everywhere, it was kind of a big deal, and she kind of became infatuated with this man that she saw on television. And so that's why she decided to go down to the courthouse when he was being released, because she was kind of obsessed with this man. And because it was such a thing, the pair started dating. And when the two decided to get married, it was like a field day for the press. They even went on Good Morning America. So with the woman who had accused Gary Dodson in the start of raping her, she actually wrote her own book, and the book's called Forgive Me. She signed over all of the proceeds to go to Gary Dodson, and it was something like, it was just under $18,000. So Gary and Camille were getting the proceeds for this book. They were starting a life, and that just so happened to involve having a baby, and this baby's name is Ashley. Not only was Gary receiving money from the proceeds, but he also signed over the rights to his story for a movie deal, and that was in 2003. And not only that, but obviously the legal system owes him for a wrongful conviction, and so he got just over $120,000. But with all of this money, and also we have to remember that this man spent 12 years in prison. There are so many studies out there, you can look this up yourself and learn about how horrid the prison system is, but if you are someone who is not guilty of something, you go into prison and you come out a worse person because you experience things that are horrific, and you're also treated in a certain way that literally breaks and strips you down as a human being. I also recently learned that the American prison system has stopped actually giving the public information on how many people commit suicide in prison. And this is after the public learned that suicides in prison was the leading cause of death in the USA. And so after a certain year, I think it was like 2015, the American prison system now restricts the public from knowing any information on that stuff. So as you can imagine, this man went into prison, spent 12 years, over a decade in prison. He's come out as you know, he's got some problems, and I can't imagine that he was getting too much help for that, especially in a time where mental health and also men's mental health is not being taken quite seriously. And so I can't imagine he's getting any sort of support for his mental health after being in prison. So with that in mind, we can kind of understand why he's resorted to substance abuse, to becoming kind of an alcoholic, being very, very violent, and he is getting progressively worse. And not just the drinking, he becomes domestically violent. He starts fighting people in bars. I think he had 4 DUIs at this point, and he basically spent all of the money that he got from the proceeds of Forgive Me, from the movie deal, and also the over $120,000 that he got for the wrongful conviction. Because they were running out of money, Gary and Camille decided to take their daughter Ashley back to Chicago because they had briefly lived in Las Vegas. Now, Gary is getting progressively worse, especially with his wife, Camille. He's becoming more physically violent, and one particular incident actually ended up in the news. There was an incident where Gary was very drunk, and he had actually hit Camille, and Camille then flagged down a police car and was basically like, "This man has hit me." She filed charges. It was a misdemeanor. It was a simple battery charge. Camille ended up taking back those charges and not going forward with them. And she said to the press, "No, like, we were just tired. Like, it wasn't his fault," you know, the things that victims tend to say. And then a spokesperson came out for the family and just said that it was a squabble, it just got out of control. But I'm sure that everyone watching this knows it was an actual problem. So the pair got back together, but as we all know, things like this just tend to get worse and worse and worse and worse. And so Camille did try to end it one more time, but Gary ended up breaking into her house and then being arrested for trespassing. And this is when Camille decided to file a legal separation from Gary. She then decided to take Ashley, her daughter, and her mother, Barbara, back to Las Vegas. And because she didn't have any higher education, and she also didn't really have a lot of work experience because they were living off the money that Gary was receiving from his wrongful conviction for so long, and she didn't really need to work, and also she's a mother. So they were kind of doing it rough in Las Vegas. So because they were struggling to make ends meet, Camille decided to start stripping at the Crazy Horse. And this is when I'm going to get into the background of these certain strip clubs, because it wasn't just the Crazy Horse that she was working at. She was working at a bunch of different clubs, but all of these clubs are owned by a man called Jack Gilardi. So now we're going to take a little pause in Camille's story. I want to talk to you about the Gilardi family. Jack Gilardi is originally, at least in Camille's story, described as a gangster, but I think that is probably the wrong word to use. If I was going to use any sort of word, I would use a mobster, but more like he's a mob associate. So basically, Jack Gilardi owns most of the strip clubs in Las Vegas, and not just Las Vegas, but in a bunch of different locations in the US. So this man is a very wealthy man. He owns a 400-acre ranch just outside Atlanta. He also has 2 corporate airplanes, and he's got his own helicopter. Now, something that is probably the most notable thing for Jack Gilardi in particular, apart from his strip clubs, is that he was involved in sort of a pretty big lawsuit. So obviously Jack Gilardi owns all these strip clubs, and there were laws that came in basically called the no touch laws, and this prohibited patrons from touching the dancers, and it also prohibited alcohol being consumed or served past 1 a.m. It also prohibited dim lighting in strip clubs, and it prohibited lap dances, and then obviously touching of the ladies. So this meant that patrons could no longer do as much with the dancers. Jack Gilardi filed a $70 million lawsuit, and this lawsuit was basically for compensation for the damages to his business, for the money that he would have lost when these laws came into place. And this is where we're going to talk about the Gilardi family. We're going to talk about Jack Gilardi's son, Michael. Michael co-owned a couple of the clubs that his father ran. Not all of them, I think it was only like 2. This is where things get interesting. We have the Gilardi family, and then we have all of their strip clubs, and then we have a secret FBI operation, and I hate that they called it this. It makes me want to feel sick a little bit because it's just so lame. But the FBI's sting operation was named Operation G-String. So Operation G-String was a probe into Michael Gilardi's club called Jaguars. They were looking into what they suspected as Michael bribing elected officials. When they made their bust, Michael actually confessed, and he pleaded guilty to corruption charges. And he also said that he would testify against 2 particular elected officials who apparently took money under the table. When this happened, his father, Jack Gilardi, said that he's washed his hands of his son. He then bought out the rest of his son's shares in the 2 strip clubs that they co-owned together. And then he started claiming that the city was punishing him for his son's wrongdoing. So with his son facing corruption charges, Jack Gilardi's clubs were then only allowed to have temporary 1-month liquor licenses, which would stress a businessman out when you've got all of these different strip clubs that can only have temporary 1-month liquor licenses. So Jack Gilardi then leased Jaguars to 2 ex-policemen, and these ex-policemen were then able to get 4-month temporary liquor licensing for Jaguars. 4 months is better than 1 month, you know what I'm saying? But it's interesting that the people that he leased it to are 2 ex-police officers, and this will be a pattern. Their relationship between the police force and elected city council people and everything else. So just keep that in mind. 4 months after his son's arrest for corruption charges, Jack Gilardi's clubs in Tampa were then hit. So 4 of the Gilardi strip clubs in Tampa were investigated by the police, and then 6 people were arrested because the clubs were basically a prostitution front. So Gilardi was basically like, I had no knowledge of this, I am just the owner, I am not involved in any of the illegal activities that happen in the strip clubs that I own. So he was not charged. Another interesting thing to note, and probably the most eerie thing to note, is that Gilardi's ex-business partner, Tony, was, well, not all of him was found, just his severed head. Gilardi's ex-partner Tony's severed head was found in the desert. Gilardi's comment on this was, "You'll find very few partnerships that last." After Operation G-String, after that operation ended, the FBI kept the operation's name the same, but they decided to make a new operation, still looking into the Gilardi family and at least the businesses that they run. They kept the name the same though. They still called it Operation G-String, but now their new interest was of arms dealing. So selling guns and weapons and things like that. So I mention these investigations, I mentioned the severed head, I mentioned the mob related things because I want you to remember that Camille started working at these chains of strip clubs. So let's start talking about Camille's story again. Where we last left off, she started working at the Crazy Horse, and she also started falling into that stripper lifestyle. She started drinking more, she also started using cocaine, and this is where she met a man called Cruz Diaz Jr. She fell in love, the pair got married, she even got his name tattooed on her. But it wasn't long before Cruz became physically abusive. Camille then became addicted to crack cocaine and her life was kind of spiraling. And this is when she started getting into prostitution with regulars from Jack Gilardi's club. At this point in time, her daughter Ashley was only 7 years old. Barbara raised Camille in, upper middle class settings. Camille was raised to be a ballet dancer, a semi-pro ice skater. And so when Barbara saw Ashley being raised kind of like the complete opposite, with her mother who was now doing crack cocaine, stripping, and prostitution, Barbara kind of took control a little bit and she took Ashley from Camille and they moved back to Chicago, leaving Camille behind in Las Vegas. So for Camille, her daughter had been taken away, obviously for the better, but it still would take a very huge toll on you. You no longer have your motherly support when you need it. No matter how strained a mother-daughter relationship is, when you lose someone like that, it still takes a toll on you. And obviously she has an abusive husband, Cruz, who is acting all types of crazy. And so Camille started spending time with a man who we are going to assume is William Brooks, but she started spending a lot of time with a police officer. And one of the police officers that we know was at the Crazy Horse at the time that this was happening is William Brooks. Now, Officer William Brooks later, after all of this happened, was arrested for corruption because he was drug trafficking. He was probably trafficking long before he got arrested, is what I'm trying to say. Camille's life was not great, obviously. She started abusing drugs more, her teeth became discolored, and she also had a recently broken nose because Cruz had beaten her to the point where it broke. And the warrants for her arrest started building up. Now, I just want to flag in here that Camille was starting to get arrested for things like jaywalking, just really petty things. And I want you to just flag that in your mind, that she was being arrested for petty things, that she was spending a lot of time with a corrupt police officer, and that she was also working in a known mobster's brand of strip clubs. Like, it wasn't just the one club, she was working for all of his strip clubs. Her friends would say that she was starting to get quite paranoid, and I'm assuming that her friends knew the difference between crack cocaine paranoid and someone's following me paranoid, because they said that she specifically flagged that she thought she was being followed. But Camille refused to comment on who it was she thought was following her. Her mother's gone, her daughter's gone. She's trying to get away from her abusive husband, and she's also a known drug addict who keeps getting arrested for, probably minor things, but also probably to keep her off the street. And so no one really notices when she goes missing, and that is a really sad thing. But she goes missing because 7 months after Barbara had taken Ashley from Camille, she actually returned. And it turned out that no one had seen Camille. So Barbara filed a missing persons report. We can assume it's from her lifestyle that the police just kind of didn't really care. They didn't put any resources into it. But also another thing that stopped the police from investigating is that 2 weeks after this missing persons report was filed into the system, an officer who is unknown to this day deleted Camille's missing person report. So Barbara is searching for her daughter. She goes to all of Jack Gilardi's strip clubs looking for her daughter. She hangs up posters. She questions all of the Las Vegas locals, but literally nobody had seen or heard from Camille. Some time goes by and one of Camille's childhood friends sees that Camille has gone missing. She decides to call the police station that is supposed to be investigating this missing persons case. When she calls the Las Vegas Metro Police Station, they're basically like, there is no investigation. Her childhood friend is like, what the heck? My friend is missing. There is a missing persons report in there. And that's when they find out that the missing persons report was deleted. So we know that At the time of her disappearance, she was spending time with a corrupt police officer. But that is not the only explanation for this. I mean, a lot of people say that it's likely Officer William Brooks who deleted her missing persons report. But in Camille's Rolodex, in her address book, a number was found, and when they called this number, it was actually a number to the FBI. I want you to remember Operation G-String. That was an FBI sting. Both Operation G-Strings, oh, I hate that name, was an FBI sting. And not only that, but Camille's friends said that shortly before Camille went missing, that Camille had stated that she was approached by the FBI to become a undercover informant, a CI. What's the C stand for? And her daughter Ashley said that on the last phone call she ever had with Camille, her mother was saying things like, "I love you, please make sure that you're being good," which is all stuff that, I mean, I can imagine a mother saying to a child just normally. But if Ashley says that it felt like her mother was saying goodbye, I'm gonna say that's because of the inflections in her mother's voice. So Ashley said that the last phone call that she had with her mother really honestly sounded like a goodbye call. So the last time anyone was confirmed to have seen Camille was on the 26th of September. This was when she was arrested with her roommate, Francisco Fernandez, but his nickname was Kiko. Now the arrests were for drug trafficking. Basically, Fernandez was known to sell drugs out of the apartment window, kind of like a drive-through. So what happened with this arrest? Basically, one of the people who works at their apartment complex called the police and said that somebody was having a domestic. The police came to the site and it was Camille and Fernandez arguing, and Camille was like, "Look, it's not a big deal, we just had a disagreement." But police saw on the ground a big package that said "Para Kiko," which means for Kiko in English. But not just this suspicious package that said "for Kiko." Kiko was standing in front of a dresser and he had his arms behind his back, but it looked like he was holding or hiding something behind his back that was on the dresser. The police officers got suspicious and they walked in and they checked behind him, and basically it was a whole bunch of cocaine. So both Camille and Fernandez were arrested for this and they were charged with drug trafficking. They spent 2 weeks in jail, but then they were released on bond. This was the last time anyone was ever confirmed to have seen Camille. She was supposed to come for an arraignment hearing and she just never showed up. Fernandez was known to come in and out of the US. He would travel to Cuba and through Mexico. And something that Ashley says and other advocates for this case say is that it is extremely unlikely that Camille, an active drug user, would be able to go so many years without being arrested. So one likely thing, or at least one theory in this case, is that Fernandez may have trafficked her. It's really easy to, well, I mean, I'm not saying it's really easy as in like I've tried it, but it's just something that's very common in human trafficking, is that to get somebody to be easily controlled, you get them addicted to drugs. And it would have been made 10 times easier if you have somebody who is already relying and dependent on crack cocaine. Not only that, she was already prostituting herself through the strip clubs. We also know that Fernandez is a violent man. Fernandez has been arrested on several occasions, and 2 occasions was where he tried to strangle his victims. This next thing might be relevant to you. It just really depends on what you believe. But Ashley, Camille's daughter, and Barbara, Camille's mother, had gone to see psychics. And a lot of the psychics said that they believed that Camille was still alive and she was in a foreign country. So that is why some people, I guess spiritual people or people who might believe in psychics, believe that maybe she was smuggled into a different country and that's why she hasn't been found. You know, maybe she went because she wanted to go, because she was trying to hide from maybe someone from the FBI or maybe someone from the Gilardi family, or maybe from her ex, who was extremely abusive. So it is possible that she decided to leave the country. I don't believe that though. I don't believe that someone who was still having phone contact with her daughter, that she would ever just be like, you know what, see you later. There is a small chance that she did, but I just don't believe that. It is also a possibility that she was smuggled into a different country or trafficked. I'm going to tell you a couple of different theories just really quickly before I get to what I believe. But a lot of people obviously think that it was her ex. He had left her with a broken nose. That's fucked. And although the pair were separated, they were never actually legally divorced. And Cruz was later then arrested for attempted murder. Not arrested, he was actually convicted of attempted murder. So we know that he's capable of murder. There is another theory that she was murdered by the 1% biker gang and that she is buried in the desert. There is there's not a lot of information to back that up though. And even though there's been no other YouTuber or no other person who has mentioned Jack Gilardi or even the Gilardi family or even the Gilardi chains that she worked for, one particular write-up, the one that I linked below, mentions a name that I saw come up when I was researching the Operation G-String investigation from the FBI. And that name is Rick Rizzoli. Rick Rizzoli was Camille's ex-boss. There's rumors with people who've lived in Las Vegas forever that Rick Rizzoli has bodies in the desert. So the reason that Rick Rizzoli's name flagged when I saw that he was Camille's ex-boss was because I saw it when I was researching Operation G-String for the corruption charges. Now, Rick Rizzoli's name was mentioned alongside some pretty scary names who are involved with the mob. And Rizzoli is also linked to Gilardi. So Rick Rizzoli was named in the case as a main player along with arms dealer Charles Tappe and obviously both Jack Gilardi and his son Michael Gilardi. I'm sorry if I said that person's last name wrong, but I want to just talk about Rick Rizzoli for one hot second. So Rizzoli is an alleged mob associate, but he's also part owner of Crazy Horse 2, as in TOO, not TWO. Crazy Horse 2 opened after Crazy Horse, the original Crazy Horse. Rizzoli is suspected to be a hidden partner in the original Crazy Horse, along with Joey Cusimano, Fred Dimani, and Vinny Faracchi. I am so bad at listen, if you don't come for me because I've named you involved in this missing persons case, I understand if you come for me because I cannot pronounce shit. But listen, there is a definite connection between the Gilardi family and Rizzoli. The relationship may have soured post FBI sting, and not so much after the corruption FBI sting, but more so after the FBI turned Operation G-String from the corruption charges, focusing on the mob related things and also the arms dealing. And it's not just Jack Gilardi who seems to have severed heads that end up in the desert, because we know that Rizzoli is known, or at least rumored, to have had several bodies in the desert. So I'm sure you can see the connections that I'm making here. Camille's connection to the Gilardi family, the Gilardi's family's connection to Rizzoli, Camille's connection to Rizzoli, the Gilardi family and Rizzoli connection to the FBI, Camille's connection to the FBI. By the way, in her Rolodex to the FBI, the FBI's number was saved under Dimitri. Camille's also connection with corrupt drug trafficking police officers. Camille's connection to a drug trafficker, Fernandez. You know what I'm saying? All of them are connected. So let's talk about Dimitri for a second. The FBI Dimitri man. We know that Camille's friends said that she was approached to become a CI. I don't care. Oh, I mean, I do care, but I'm saying it's not relevant if Camille said yes or no to becoming an undercover informant for the FBI. If anybody at the club got wind of this, whether it was another dancer, whether it was, you know, because she had some sort of relationship with a corrupt police officer, or whether it was just a rumor, if you have mob bosses or anybody, any information gets back to a mob boss or even like a very wealthy businessman who has surrounded himself with rumors of killing people and leaving their severed heads in the desert, it doesn't matter if you say yes or no to becoming an informant. If somebody gets wind of that, it's so much easier to just cut loose ties. And so that really could be a simple thing of like, she probably didn't want to become an informant, but it doesn't matter, because if someone gets wind of it, they'd much rather just kill someone than have to deal with any of that bullshit. At the end of the day, if you are a drug dependent dancer, also a female, you are pretty easily discarded of. Whether that is from bad people or uncaring FBI officers who just wanted to use you as a CI. And that's where I want to talk about the FBI's involvement. Because I think that when people think of the FBI, they think, okay, well, these are the good guys. You know what I'm saying? Like, these are the people who are supposed to protect and serve. Not always true. We know from the Teague and Teague case that oftentimes FBI agents, you know, they don't just go on an operation for a couple of months. Oftentimes operations like Operation G-String take years before any arrests are made. FBI agents who have been working for literal years to get the bad guy. FBI agents who have gone undercover for literal years to get the bad guy. Don't always stay people who are there to protect and serve. The goal for them often moves away from protecting and serving the people to getting the bad guy that they've spent years being in an undercover role for. We know this from the Teague and Teague case, when she was approached to become an informant and then she suddenly disappears after the sting. Something went wrong. And it's easier for FBI agents to be like, well, we don't know what happened, than to admit that maybe something went wrong during the operation. It's easier for them to revoke their responsibility of their informants, because at the end of the day, they see their informants as just criminals and disposable people. And it doesn't take much for something to go wrong, especially when it involves mobsters, drugs, money, and the FBI. So I want you to just think about the amount of personal investment an FBI agent who has been undercover for so long, how much would you be willing to do or overlook in a situation like that? Was Camille overlooked? Did something happen? Did somebody catch wind that she was approached to become a CI? Who deleted her missing persons report 2 weeks after it was filed? Who is this FBI agent Dimitri? Do you believe that this is a mob-related case? Or do you think that I've just made connections where there aren't any? Because thus far, and I know that other true crime YouTubers who have covered this case just got their information from that one article. I don't know, I felt compelled to look up who Jack Gilardi was, because everyone was like, oh, you know, she worked for a bad guy, his name was Jack Gilardi. But why is he a bad guy? What was he involved in? What was happening around the time that she got disappeared, or that she went missing? You know, what was the climate? You know, like, what were the things that were happening around her? And for the people who say, well, you know, Gilardi, Rizzoli, all of these big mobsters and business owners aren't going to be that invested in who's working for them. But let me just remind you of this. You don't have to meet the boss or the big boss, the mobsters, for you to be murdered by them or gotten rid of by them. It takes one dancer to be like, oh my God, Camille has been approached by the FBI to become a CI, for somebody to hear that and pass it along to the big boss. You know what I'm saying? And it's so much easier to be like, all right, we'll just get rid of her. I know that a lot of people lean on the theory that it was one of her exes, one of her abusive exes, and it was a domestically violent situation that went wrong. That is so possible. But I tend to lean more towards, well, what was going on at the time? I think it's just so much easier for someone to just be like, okay, we'll just get rid of her. Especially when these people are surrounded by severed heads and arms dealing and drugs and trafficking and all of that kind of stuff. You know what I'm saying? So what do you guys think? Do you think I've made a connection where there is none? Please don't come for me if you're involved in the mob. I'm just a random person on YouTube. I already have enough drug dealers trying to kill me right now. In terms of Camille's living daughter, Ashley, she and her friends are the only people who are making waves in this. This case is quite old. She hasn't heard from the Las Vegas Metro Police Department in like over a decade, but she did give them her DNA just in case any remains or a body or anything comes up so that they can match it with familial testing. Camille's mother, Barbara, unfortunately now is very elderly and she suffers from dementia. So right now, unfortunately, it is just Ashley who remembers her mother. So I don't know where my video is going to reach in terms of this case. I know that a lot of my viewership is in America. So if you are, or if you know somebody who was living in Las Vegas or even Chicago at the time, or you've got some sort of connection to the area, to anybody who might know anybody, who might know anybody, who might know anybody, who might remember something, share this video. I don't know where it's gonna end up, you know, because I'm from Australia, so I don't know. I hope that I did this case justice. I didn't want to be one of those YouTubers who just read from that article down there. I'm sorry if I have made connections where maybe I shouldn't have, but that is my theory, and I just thought it was mind-blowing that nobody else decided to look into the people she was surrounded with. All of this information as well is available on the internet. It's not, you know, I'm not making any huge revelations. I'm just putting it all together in one succinct form. So please don't murder me. Anyways, you guys, let me know what your theories are in the comments down below. Give this video a thumbs up because it really does help. And if you want to see more true crime, give your girl a subscribe. I don't just do true crime Sundays. I do story times, I do makeup videos, I do mukbangs, and like basically everything that you can imagine. So subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.